Good morning. This is Crystal Woods with Seasons in the Vine, and it's Fresh Friday. And I am so excited about today's message. It's been one that I've been sitting on for maybe like 9 months. But this past week, the Lord brought it to mind for a friend for like a very specific word. And then I was like, everybody should have this, you know? And so I thought I would just bring it to you now. It seems like the right time. So I want to talk about the difference between the Red Sea crossing and the Jordan River crossing. Same nation, the nation of Israel, but vastly different interaction and different people. Like they became a different people. And so let's get into the word. So we are going to, this is just going to blow your mind. So just hold on to your seats a little bit. It's so good. So we're going to be in Exodus 14, and we get up to the Red Sea, and you can just look at the whole thing. I'm just going to paraphrase it a little bit, but just so you know, they're slaves. I have some notes here. They're slaves. They're very fearful because their slave master is coming after them and does not want to let them be free. They're very doubtful. They don't know who God is. They have left behind intimate knowledge of God. Like they had prayed for a deliverer, but then when the deliverer came, they were like, you know what? We want to be slaves still. So maybe that's you today. Maybe the Lord is calling you into freedom, but freedom is scarier than just doing what you do now and remaining in that place of bondage, because freedom you don't know yet. So I just encourage you to just go into this message and hear from the Lord whatever he would want you to hear about freedom being better, even though it can be really foreign if we've never experienced it. So they don't know God, they're doubtful, they're fearful, they've been slaves for centuries now, and they are having a slave mentality. Like that's the way that they think. And they feel abandoned by God. They're up against the Red Sea, and even though he's been so evident to them in their deliverance, when that fear sets in, it's like, where is God? I mean, and that can be true of us. So when the right circumstance comes along or the fear comes along, suddenly we can be throwing our hands up in the air saying like, God abandoned me, which is not true. And we want to grow out of that slave mentality into being children of God and acting like children. So you're going to see this so clearly. All right, so they get up to the Red Sea, and God says to Moses, like, why are you crying out to me? I'm in verse 15. Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Like, keep going. Why are you stopping? Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. Okay, then Jesus. And then the Lord is like, I will harden the heart of the Egyptians. So this is what you need to do, Moses. You need to raise the staff. You need to tell the people to walk. I'm going to take care of Pharaoh. All right. I love that, because could God do it all? Yes. But does he like to partner with people? Yes. All right. So then we have this happen. Then verse 19, then the angel of God who had been traveling in front of Israel's army withdrew and went behind them. So instead of being in the front, now he's in the back. And in verse 21, then Moses stretched his hand out over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided. Keep that in mind, because you're going to see something different when we get to the Jordan River. But Moses has to stick his staff out. Then the waters divide. Then the people walk. That is slave. Now, that's pretty common. Like pastors can preach the difference. So keep that in mind. That's pretty basic. But what I felt the Lord told me as like a little extra insight for me specifically is that, yes, they needed to have the water parted before they stepped in because they were slaves. They did not trust God as children would trust a parent. And that means, this is the extra little thing, is that they needed to see the miracle before they trusted the Lord. They needed to see it. They wanted a sign. Doesn't that sound like the Pharisees? God, if you would just do this, I would follow you. They needed to see that. That's a slave mentality. You don't want to have that mentality. You want to be so in relationship with your Father in heaven, that you are his child, and that you don't need to see the miracle in order to obey and move forward. Because you know if he has said it, it will happen, and you're just going to move forward anyway. So let's jump over. The other thing, east-west divide, the water's divided that way. Okay, now let's go to the Jordan River. This is Joshua 3. So jump on over a couple of books to Joshua 3. So exciting. Now it's time to cross the Jordan. Now, mind you, 40 years have passed. Okay, so like they didn't take on the promised land. They had to wander. That first generation, that oldest generation had to die off because that slave mentality was not going to leave them. They were not going to be the conquerors that they needed to be. I think my son is weed whacking, which is awesome. But we might hear him a little bit. So they're crossing the sea right now, or no, they're crossing the Jordan. So they come up and they have very specific instructions. When the Ark of the Covenant gets here, have the priest step into the water, then the water's going to part. A little bit different. Let's look at verse 10. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you. This is the promise they have. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. See, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the Ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its water flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up on a heap. Okay, there's so many differences here. First thing I want you to notice is when they step in, that's when the water will part. Red Sea, that slave mentality, they have to see the miracle before they stepped into the dry waterbed. This time, they will step in while the water is still flowing, and then they will see the miracle. That's a child mentality. That is, I have the promise of my Father that as I step out in obedience and I follow him, he will do the miracles. Like he will keep his word to me. See the difference? Now, the other thing that's just really cool, just like a happenstance, is with the Red Sea, it parted and it divided. With the Jordan, think about the river flowing down, the water stops and piles up. That's crazy. So it isn't a split like this. It's a wall of water like to their left if it's flowing down, and they're walking across with this massive wall of water next to them. So cool, but only on one side. So what we see there in verse 13 is that as soon as they step into the water moves. Different. That's a child. We want to not have to see the miracle. This is my little extra take. I feel like the Holy Spirit said, like, children don't have to see the miracle before they trust the Lord and obey. They trust the Lord and obey, and then they will see the promise of God. But a slave needs to see God do all of it in advance because there's no trust. They're not children. They're not children. Okay, so verse 17, if we jump down to that, the priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. Isn't that amazing? They're children now. It took 40 years of God providing for them in the wilderness, protecting them in the wilderness, and giving them identity. You're my children. You're mine. Here's my law. This is the way we live. You're different than all the other peoples of the earth because you're mine. Isn't that amazing? And now they're children, and children obey their parents. That's what we want to see. They obey and they trust. So now they're children. They're not afraid to cross this water. They're obedient. They step in and then they see the miracle. They don't have to see the miracle first. And they're confident because they already know intimately his provision, his protection, and they have identity in him. Wow. So are you a person that won't trust the Lord until you see the miracle or you see what you need to see from him in order for you to feel better? Because that's a slave mentality. That's the Red Sea parting. Or are you a child and you know your Father has good plans for you and you know you can trust him, and so you're willing to obey and just step out into the water, right? Just to go out there knowing, oh my goodness, he's going to show up. I don't know how or what it will look like, but I'm going to step out anyway. And he's going to meet me, and he is going to move that water once I step out in obedience. That's a child. That's childlike faith. Like, God, you don't have to prove anything to me to get me to listen to you. I'm going to listen to you because you are my Father. Totally different. So ask Holy Spirit, where are you today in that? Are there certain areas of your life you can trust just like a child? And then there are other areas maybe where it's a little harder. Where do you need to reject the slave mentality? I just love this message. I hope it blesses you tremendously. Share it on social media if you feel led by the Lord. I'm not on there. Facebook reviewed it. I submitted my license saying I was hacked and all of that, and they rejected it and said they reviewed it, and they still disabled my accounts. So I will not be moving in that direction. I also don't believe the Lord wants me to move in that direction, but it doesn't mean the word still won't get out. So if this blessed you, do what you do with it. And I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.